Hey guys, it's RobJamWeb here for episode 3 of The Tracks of My Years, and episode 3 is now 1991. A lot of the kind of indie dance stuff is kind of on its way out, but not fully. You've got stuff coming through now which is on a more clubby sort of hardcore sort of vibe. Obviously there's still a lot of great vocal tracks coming out, a lot more dance orientated stuff, but this really is the year of my teenage rebellion, so to speak, and my teenage sort of rave years, if you like. Where basically a lot of stuff was coming out, so much stuff was coming out. It was thick and fast, and it was when I first discovered, I started regularly, religiously listening and taping a local pirate radio station. So I was picking up loads of new sounds that I would never have heard before. And that was called Rave FM, which was based over in Nottingham, and that ran for a year or two. And it was just one of those proper little services that you would never get on mainstream. It was great. You'd get all sorts of rave cuts on there, and it was brilliant. So anyway, that was my go-to thing at that period for new music. And also obviously records that were coming out, there was a lot of pop acts were getting all good remixes done and so forth. And I'm going to start it a little bit down tempo at the moment. I'm going to start it with a couple of bands that obviously are important to me. And the first one is electronic, and that's obviously Bernard Sumner and Johnny Marr from the Smiths and New Order, respectively. And they did a track called Get the Message that year, and it was just a great little breakbeat summer track. And there was a DNA remix. There was quite a few mixes of it, I think. And the original is amazing. Proper guitar rock sort of thing. But this one is the DNA version, which is kind of, that kind of a bit primal screamy. It's got that kind of feel to it, which was obviously around at that time also. So yeah, this is the first track, electronic, Get the Message, the DNA version. And I'm going to do a lot of tracks, that are, there's a whole mixture of stuff today, because 1991, so much good stuff came out. I've had to really pick the best of the best, and filter it right down to my core favourites. So hopefully we should have some fun. It's got that kind of piano rave vibe in it, but it's also down tempo. It's got a bit of both, and of course it's got the great vocals by Bernard Sumner in there as well.
I always thought of you as my brick wall, built like an angel, 6 feet tall. 6 feet tall. And when you go away, I start to weep. You're too expensive, girl, to keep. Isn't it sweet? Take my independent point of view.
So that was electronic and Get the Message, the DNA remix. You can tell that they missed out the chorus there, which was significant, I suppose. But nevertheless, still a great track, and came out on Factory Records. Again, Bernard Sumner by this point had not been paid enough for his New Order productions. I don't know why I thought he was going to get paid for that. Still. Anyway, next up is my favourite band again. I ended the last episode with the Pet Shop Boys, and by 1991, this was when they did a lot of stuff that had rave acts remixing for him, because it was the hot sound of the moment. This is the single they did called DJ Culture, and it was a great record. It was produced by Brothers in Rhythm, aka Dave Seaman, And also it was remixed by The Grid, and also Alternate did a remix of the B-side for it. So they were there on the, as I said in the last episode, they always got the latest remixers and DJs to put together work for them. They always, remained relevant all throughout their career. But anyway, this version is the track DJ Culture, and it was a record that was a backlash to the Gulf War and how politicians would sample previous politicians' famous quotes like Churchill or whatever, so the Pet Shop Boys wrote this song, and also how they were sampling quotes from previous politicians and how DJs sample other people's music to make new music. And that's what the record DJ Culture was about. So there was two versions of this. I remember buying this when it came out. I was 15, and they were my favourite band. This is the bit slower than the original, but this is the Grid remix, and it's a great record. Very clever pop. DJ Culture by the Pet Shop Boys. I can remember going to HMV to buy that for like $1.99 or whatever it was the week it came out. And on the flip side was Music for Boys, which is a track they did, which was obviously a shout to the rave sound, the hardcore techno rave sound that was coming out at that time. And this is an alternate version, and as soon as you hear this, you just know that sound from that era.
Let the bass kick.
She's got that really low sort of nasty rave synth sound. So that was the flip side, which was by Alternate, or the remix by Alternate. So yeah, they always remained relevant, and they still do to this day. They still have the latest credible producers remixing their work. Now, this next record is probably the coolest record of that year, I suppose, out of all the dance and rave stuff. But it wasn't neither of those. It was a record in a league of its own. It still is in a league of its own after nearly 30 years. And when I first heard this, it was on MTV, and it was as soon as you saw the video started without the song, and it was a guy playing with two metal balls, like stress balls, so to speak, what's called ball bearings. He's playing with them in his hand, and then all of a sudden you see her coming onto the street, and it's Shara Nelson and Unfinished Sympathy by Massive Attack. As soon as I heard this record, I was like, whoa, it just hit you instantly. Even at the age of 15, I was like, wow, I need that record. And I can remember going to BPM Records to buy it, and I paid something like probably $2-3.99 for it, at the time, which is a lot of pocket money. But yeah, this version is the ultimate version, and it just strikes a chord instantly the minute it drops on the turntable, and it's just magic. Massive Attack and Shara Nelson and Unfinished Sympathy. Now, years later, I would end up doing a cover version of this when I was signed to a record label through Universal Music. And I did a cover version of this, and we spent months on it, getting it just right, me and a friend of mine called Ben Constable. And we spent months getting it right, and I even employed the vocalist from Bizarre Inc., Angie Brown, to come and do the vocals. And we went to this big studio in London, and we spent all day and night there trying to get these vocals right, and we just got it. We got it eventually, and then the record just fell apart basically, and the whole thing fell apart, and the label just had enough and said that Massive Attack didn't want it released. So my connection with Massive Attack lies in that record, and the fact that they prevented me, apparently, or their management prevented me, should I say, from doing a version of it 20 something years ago. So that was that. And another sad thing about that record is that Shara Nelson, the vocalist, is she's had some really bad times. She became deluded and convinced herself that she was married to Pete Tong, the DJ. And this is a true story. And Pete Tong had to get a restraining order on her and went to court. When she went to court to get this restraining order, she announced herself to the judge as Mrs. Tong. She's not a well woman at all, I don't think. But, hopefully she's doing all right now. But yeah, that was Massive Attack and Unfinished Sympathy. And that record just blew me away. Now, this record, I didn't buy this till 2 years later. So it came out in 91. And obviously it was an underground club hit, which obviously I wasn't on the clubs in that period. But this record I bought in early 1993, something like that. And it's just a record that has been rinsed and remixed and ripped off over the years several times in one form or another. But it's the original still carries a lot of weight. And it is Do You Want It Right Now by Degrees of Motion. And it was originally recorded by Shader Garrett way back in 85, but took several years for it to become a club anthem, so to speak. And then there was the version with Gat Core, which came out, which was another hit. And then there's been various remixes throughout the 2000s as well. But this version is like a dark breakbeat version that starts off like a dark breakbeaty track, and it's quite slow, and then it goes into a funky vibe. It's got that kind of moody breakbeat to it. It's just one of those records. I much prefer this than Shine On, which was their other big hit. I played that record out, obviously, for people to hear it, but I never really got on with that record as much as I do with this one. This one just has the magic touch. It's all dark and moody here, and then it goes into a nice garagey vibe. Hear the scratches on my copy. Emotion, Do You Want It Right Now, the original version. And yeah, it was one of those records that took a while to get going, but once it did, it kicked off in various different forms throughout the years. So yeah, that was that. Now we're heading over towards Italy, and obviously, as I mentioned this before, the late 80s, early 90s, the Italians came out with some absolute corking records. Some of them are just phenomenal. And this one is no exception. This one is called Funk Machine. By Funk Machine, called I've Closed the Door, and it was on Flying Records, Italy, and it was one of those great little vocal tracks that people like Sasha and Laurent Garnier would play throughout their sets, whilst also playing more techno-y stuff as well. So it kind of, in that era where everything was crossing over, you would play a vocal track next to a breakbeat track and so on. You know, there wasn't much pigeonholing as such. And this record was just a beautiful garagey vocal thing. Stunning record. Close the Door by Funk Machine. And there's various little samples in there. That little vocal bit there is an old disco record. There's a little Pink Floyd sample there near the start. And there's a various other little vocal hooks throughout, which are borrowed from other records. But the vocal is the mainstay. And it's one of those great smooth vocal tracks that was produced from Italy during their golden period, as I like to call it. Now, keeping up with that golden period from the Italians is another record that I heard, funnily enough, on Radio 1 during that summer. And that summer, as I say, the Pet Shop Boys were doing really well with their tour and their album and stuff that came out the year before. And they were asked to be guest DJs on Radio 1, covering for Simon Bates. And they were that popular, they were asked twice in a year in a row, 2 years in a row to do it. And they would have DJs come on every morning for those 5 days they were covering to do like a 15-minute mix. And they'd have Carl Cox and Kenny Ken, and they had Sasha and a couple of others I can't remember now. But I used to tune in every morning when they were on, and then I'd record it, and I've still got some of them on tape. And this record was played on there as well, and it's called To Be House by SSR. Again, it's another Italian record on Inside Records. But it is basically a remake, a sample with a vocal on of Mr. Fingers' Can You Feel It? And I would imagine this is the first time that I heard that loop off the Mr. Fingers record. But it's like a more Italian piano-y vibe with a great vocal on, but it's got the main loop of it is Mr. Fingers' Can You Feel It? And it's just a record that I really fell in love with at the time, and had to get it. An import copy would have cost me $6.99, which was a fortune for a 12-inch for a kid. Blatant rip-off, basically. But it's got a really nice vocal and piano.
You
Car to Be House. And as I say, I first did that on Radio 1 when the Pet Shop Boys were guest DJs for the week, which was entertaining. And basically, the next record that I'm going to play, also from that period, during the summer of that year, and it was like it's a pop dance record, but it's just got everything you need for a good record, and it is Cola Boy, 7 Ways to Love, and it's Saint Etienne produced it, or they produced it, yeah, and basically it's just a great pop dance record that it's just a nice record basically. There's no other way to describe it. It's not hardcore, it's not funky or anything like that, it's just a nice good dance record. Quite lush in its production. I suppose it's got Saint Etienne written all over it. You know, it's got that feel to it, that 90s pop feel.
7 ways to love. 7 ways to love. 7 ways to love. 7 ways to love.
I always like this bit. The little, where's it come? This bit. I always love that little bit. And it kicks back in again with the piano. It's really good. So that was Cola Boy and 7 Ways to Love, which was just one of those nice sort of pop records that I really loved from that era. And yeah, I've always kept hold of that. And keeping in with that kind of happier sort of sound was another record which was out that year. And I've always been in conflict with this. Whenever I've DJ'd out and I've done a classics night or something, I've always been in conflict which version to play, because I like both of them. Some people will just go straight for the hardcore beat, breakbeat version. I would go for the piano vocal mix, it depends. And that is Congress 40 Miles. And obviously the original version here is this one, where the breakbeat kicks in and you can put any acapella on it. And this is the version that most people go to. One of those simple records. All it's done is taken the piano loop from an old Jimmy Polo record called Better Days, and it's taken that and put a breakbeat on it and a little string and a bass line and then the front vocal on it as well. Simplicity is always the key for a good classic record. That was the breakbeat version, as I say, and then on the flip side is the actual vocal mix, which, you know, it's like, do you play it, don't you play it, you know. But I've always liked both. Congress and 40 Miles. And I always used to wonder what 40 Miles was. What was she away from? You know, who knows? So 40 Miles, great record. Next up then, and keeping it in with that kind of vocal vibe, I suppose, is a record that came out a year before, or 89. I think it came out in 1990 originally. It didn't really do too much, I suppose. But this version, remixed by Mr. Sasha himself, and that's Urban Soul and All Right. Now this record is just class. It's just Sasha's style really developing as a progressive house producer. You know, during the rave scene, I suppose he was playing it, the Eclipse and all that kind of thing, and Shelley's and that. But he was starting to develop his clubby stuff here with those weird little percussion patterns that he did. Just the way this kicks in with those organs and that, brilliant. It's a really moody track that then goes into something, you know, uplifting, even though the lyrics are sad. To a nice little uplifting bit here. So yeah, that was that one, and that's just one of those really cool records that, you know, I've always admired from that era, and it's always been a firm favourite. Next up, keeping in with that similar vibe, is a record that everybody, again, who've been out clubbing and whatnot, knows. It's just one of those awesome records. Again, my copy is absolutely battered to death. It's even falling out the bottom. And this is The Sound of Eden by Shades of Rhythm. Now, one of those absolute staples of club music. I didn't want to play too many big records from that year that were, you know, that have been overplayed over the years, so to speak. But this one is an exception because it's just one that I've always loved, and it's always filled the dance floor and stuff. There's so many cool records that came out that year that I've left out, you know, because of time, so to speak. But this one, it's just straight off from the off, innit? It just works from the off. And here it goes. And again, it's like one of those kind of moody lyrics, but uplifting.
Here's another chance for you to dance for me. Here's another chance for you to dance for me. Here's another chance for you to dance for me. Here's another chance for you to dance for me. Here's another chance. Here's another chance. Here's another chance for you to dance for me. Here's another chance. Here's another chance. Here's another chance for you to dance for me.
tease. She stands out from
Just the proper hands in the air,
rest.
classic.
That girl
Straight
has
out.
qualities I've never seen. Every time I see her, every time I see the girl, every time I see her, every time I see the girl.
So that was one of those records that it was just like a bit ravey, a bit poppy, still clubby. It carried all the different elements, you know, which remain. This is why it remains a classic to this day. Next up, a record kind of similar in its approach, I suppose, but this is probably a lot more sample based than you know. This is one of those records that was written by a guy called Mike E. Block and Danny Hybrid, who were Manchester DJs, and they went on to produce other things like Two Fat Guitars and stuff like that, other classics. Plus, they produced a handful of classics basically over the years. And this was under their illustrious name, and it's called Dance No More. And it starts off with this really haunting didgeridoo. And it's just full of little samples, breakbeats, horn stabs, everything. And it's just an ultimate get off your arse and dance record. I used to play this in a lot of the classic sets and a lot of the chill out sets we used to do. At 6 a.m. we put this on. And, you know, all my friends and the people around in the club or whatever would just go ballistic to it. It was like an injection in the arm when it was most needed, I suppose, one of these records. You know, it was a winner. You put it on, and you knew that people would move. And it just drops here. It's just a great intro, really. Can you imagine all the lights off, smoke machines on. You know.
Baby, love me like you do. Baby, love me like you do. Baby, love me like you do.
Illustrious and Dance No More, and again it was a number of records that came out that in that period that did that kind of thing where they just sampled the hell out of loads of other bits and bobs and strung together something brand new, which is, in my opinion, extremely creative. Following on from that, we're going a little bit more clubby now, and again another record that was released that year, but took several years for it to become a staple in clubland, so to speak. Again, this has been rinsed several times. There's been so many remixes and rip-offs of it, and it came out originally on Strictly Rhythm Records and produced by no other than Todd Terry, and it is the track Can You Feel It, under his CLS name on Strictly Rhythm 1991. Took several years to get going, as I say, and it's a firm favourite of any dance floor. It's just an instant knock your socks off record. still one of the classic records of that era, but became more of a club anthem, I suppose, a lot later on, as opposed to when it originally came out. And there's been all sorts of records that have actually sampled the main sound of that. So that was that. Going back again to another style, like the Illustrious record, which is another great record, and that is Such a Good Feeling by Brothers in Rhythm. And again, Dave Seaman and Steve Anderson produced it, who were on were flying at that point in time. And this record is just again one of those hands in the air, mad sort of records that just hits the spot. It reminds me of the same sort of genre, same sort of style was K-Class, Rhythm is a Mystery, that kind of thing. It's got that feel to it. It's clubby, it's ravey, it's party time, it's everything in there. One Brothers in Rhythm and Such a Good Feeling, and that was one of them records again, was full of sample, well the vocals are sample, and it's just a really massive hands in the air record that still sounds fresh today. Now I'm going to change the pace a little bit here. I'm going to go a little bit moody, and I'm going to start going into the more heavier stuff for the rest of the episode. Now this record again it broke more in 92 than it did in 91, I suppose. I first heard this when Laurent Garnier mixed it on one of his DJ sets on a tape somewhere. Another Italian production, and it's an outstanding record. It's never lost its flavour, and that is Last Rhythm by Last Rhythm. It's been remixed several times over the years. It's just one of those beautiful progressive house records that it just captures. A mood in that period. Don't forget the whole rave scene was kicking off, but the Italians were putting out some really dreamy house stuff, some melodic stuff, and this is probably one of the top 5 Italian house records of all time, without a doubt. yeah, Last Rhythm was one of those most significant records for me in my development as a DJ at that time, and as a bedroom DJ at that time. I wanted to get all those records. There was that, and there was various other things that came out. That came out in '91, obviously, but it was still being played heavily in '92 by Laurent Garnier, Sasha, and whoever else from that period. It was a huge record, and again, next record. Dilemma in Spirit, another Italian production and another fantastic piece of music. The intro for this is just phenomenal. It's just great, and I can remember hearing this on another Sasha tape where he mixed this with the KLF, and it drops really, really strangely like this. It's just a great record. It's slow. It's quite slow. You have to really pitch it up. But I'm going to leave it at the original pitch for now. But yeah, it was one of those great little, bit cheesy, but it carried that moodiness to it with it as well, that quality. It's really slow, in fact. Obviously, we'd play it like that. Gotta slow it down.
Lose the spirit mind.
It's an unusual record. It's quite unusual at the time. The whole gist of the record, really. It just does that all the way throughout, and it's just chops up a bit there, goes a bit hardcore there, a little bit techno-y. There's some like monks in the back. It's just one of them records that was, I can remember hearing it on a Sasha tape where he plays a KLF record, and then it just has this big bang and drops straight into that intro. It's just like woo, woo, woo. It's really kind of emotional. It's quite well, well put together mix by Sasha. One of the things he always did and still does. So that was Dilemma in Spirit, and another fine Italian release from that period. They just could do no wrong at that time. Next up is a record that I heard on Rave FM, that radio show that I talked about, and it took me a while to get this record. I never knew what it was, obviously, and at the time you couldn't just look on the internet, they didn't exist. And this record is just one of the most beautiful crossover. It's like lush, housey sort of techno record, but then it's got the hardcore vibe to it, which was, and that is Midi Rain and Eyes, the Depth Charge remix. There was an album version as well, which is with a full vocal on, which is nice. But this for me, this intro was just like, I used to have it on a tape and I used to play it to death. Absolutely play it to death at that point. It's a lush record. It's a beautiful sound. starts off nice and dreamy, and then goes into the rave stuff. Dreamy sort of house vibe again. It's just a beautiful record, and it's just one of them rave records at that time, you know, one of many that came out that had elements of everything: club, soulful, and then it was deep, and then it was hardcore, and then it was techno, and it was, you know, breakbeat. It was everything put into one. So that was Midi Rain and Eyes, the Depth Charge remix. And at that time, so many great records were coming out. You know, the whole floodgates had opened up for bedroom producers, so to speak, and home studios. And you had Alternate coming through doing their thing. You had The Prodigy doing Charlie, and that thing just exploded. And then you had loads of European house being signed over in the UK, like 2 Unlimited, and it was so many records coming out, and you couldn't keep up. And then the British rave scene was just started to really flourish. And I can remember hearing this next record because I'd watched the TV show Twin Peaks, and I still didn't understand it then. I still don't understand it now. And I heard this, and I can remember going to buy this record because it just really, I don't know, it was just really eerie record, and that's Moby Go. But when I bought the 12-inch version, it was mainly, obviously, for the video edit, which was the version we all know. And but this would also be played on Rave FM as well. But the flip side would be played, and I'll get to that in a minute. And that was a totally different vibe altogether. This is Go by Moby. I was an American, you know, no one really expected, you know, him to be an American, even though Americans invented the majority of house and techno, still. But the flip side of this was a totally different version. It was pure techno mayhem. And I used to blast this out in the bedroom, blast it out with music, as you did as a kid. None of the elements of the flip side other than the vocal, but yeah, I used to love that as well for some reason. So that was Moby Go and the Rainforest remix and the main original version on the flip side, which kind of captured the mood really, I suppose. You know, there was a little bit of darkness in there as well with the rave scene coming through as well, as opposed to hands in the air stuff. So that was that one. And staying on that dark vibe, again, another record I heard on Rave FM and just loved it for some reason. And a lot of people go on about this guy's other piece of music called Energy Flash. There's a guy called Joey Beltram, and basically he made a load of records. He's a techno legend basically, and he released this one called Beltram Volume 2, and there's a track on it called My Sound, and this used to be on Rave FM all the time, and it's kind of like techno, but it's got like a reggae vocal sample in it, and it just always stuck with me, this record did. I don't know why. I must have liked the mixtape that I had it on, but it always stuck with me. And that whole Belgian sort of techno stuff coming out. Even though Beltram is from America again. The label that released it, R&S, was a label from Europe. Belgium. little vocal songs there where it goes woo woo woo. That is actually Iggy Pop, believe it or not. So yeah, that was that. And then the other tracks on it were just a bit more melodic and a bit more down tempo, I suppose. Just a bit more moody techno, bleeps and squeaks. But yeah, that track, My Sign, I always love that record for some reason. I always like that. And his other track, Energy Flash, is obviously a firm techno classic. But I often think that one is overlooked. So that was that. And then keeping up with that hardcore vibe, I had a lot of difficulty deciding what hardcore breakbeat rave records I wanted to play because there's so many from that period. But obviously I'm not going to play the obvious stuff, too obvious stuff like Prodigy and all that kind of thing, because we all know how that goes. But this was just a banging record. It still is banging to this day. And it is T99 Anastasia. And it's just great. It starts really slow and then just kicks ass when it comes in. I love it. And this sample here is a Barry White sample, believe it or not. By Music Maestro, please. Take from Barry White album.
Music Maestro, please.
European hardcore records, which were being snapped up left, right, and centre by UK labels at that time. XL Records were on a massive high at that period. They had signed the Prodigy, they signed SL2, and Liquid, Sweet Harmony, Miss, and various other records as well. That, you know, and they're still going to this day. You know, they're a label that. It's just a banging record. It's just a brilliant hardcore record. I love that. The flip side's got like a hip house vocal thing on, which I think isn't too strong, but you can't beat the original version of that. T99 Anastasia. Now then, the final record was probably, you know, there was 4 tracks on this, but the 2 tracks on this that are just spot on. They're just spot on for that period. Obviously based on heavily based on samples. And this is a track that I think it charted quite well as well, and it's Slipmatt and Lime, SL2, and DJs Take Control with Wayne My Brain on the flip side. And it's just a badass breakbeat rave track, which samples the Night Riders' Let the Music Use You riff. And it's just one of my most favourite records, probably my most favourite hardcore record of that period, I suppose. Over all others, I suppose. It's just got everything. It just carries the whole thing. And this is SL2, DJs Take Control. That was the main one, and obviously it goes to this rave piano here. So that was the main side. And again, it's a bit crossover. It's got rave in it. It's got the house vibe in there. And then the flip side, obviously, I actually got to see SO2 live in '92 at the first rave I went to, the first proper outdoor rave I went to, called Vision, with a load of mates from where I grew up. And SO2 performed live, and they played all these hits. And it rained all night, I remember. Still, I didn't care. I was at a rave, and 40,000 people there having a great time. And they played this, and this is the B-side, which is a sample of Wayne Smith, Under Miss Langton. That was the best of the best, in my opinion, for 1991. Now, obviously, I went from mellow pop, pop groups like the Pet Shop Boys and Electronic, through to Massive Attack, and then through to pop house, vocal house, all the way up to the hardcore techno-y breakbeat stuff that was coming out. So there was a whole mass of stuff coming out that year, which, was a melting pot of sound. And it was a great time to be there, listening and buying records and dancing and spinning and whatever. So thanks very much for tuning in, and next week will be 1992, where it gets a little bit more clubby, and even though the rave scene is huge at this point, it's a mixture of both club stuff and quality hardcore rave. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.